Hello, I'm Patrick Corbett, and I'm going to talk today about three rocks. As a geologist, I have many rocks sitting around in the garden, and there's a pile of stones in my front garden there, amongst which there is a sandstone, limestone, and some granite. But the three rocks I'm referring to really today are the three architects that are fundamental to Heriot-Watt's heritage within Edinburgh: Patrick Geddes, Frank Mears, and Basil Spence. My inspiration comes from the archive. I was researching Patrick Geddes when I came across this notebook from Frank Mears for his brick and stonework course, Heriot-Watt, in 1899. So this was an inspiration for me because I realized that as part of that course, people were teaching geology back at the turn of that century. And you can see on the page on the left, you've got Frank Mears' doodle. Students, whenever they're in a lecture, they will doodle, and that's a rather nice annotation there. And on the right, you can see a basic description of granite. And so that's, unfortunately, the pages, those are about the only two pages. The rest of the book is torn out. But it is his original notebook, which I found in the National Museum of Scotland. So Patrick Geddes, who taught botany at Heriot-Watt College from 1886 to 1900, lived a life as an academic, not just in botany, but in sociology, and traveled the world teaching sociology. And he had this motto, three doves. And those three doves, and we'll see this later on, they relate to sympathy, synergy, and synthesis. Folk, work, place. And he was strongly involved in preserving the old town to where we see it today, these lovely carboniferous sandstones. He also was involved in developing and purchasing originally the Ramsay Gardens and then developing it further with some new red sandstone of Aeolian origin. And these are some of the main building stones, sandstones of old Edinburgh. There you see pictures at the top of Ramsay Garden with its nice red and white. The red sandstone is the same sandstone that we have forming the plinth of our James Watt statue at the front. It's a very clean sandstone. It's a very clean quartz sandstone. It's very resistant to weathering. On the other hand, the carboniferous sandstones, they are fluvial and they carry more clay and they tend to have variable weathering properties. And this is quite important in what happens to the stone after it's incorporated in buildings within Edinburgh. Now, there are these mason pillars at the entrance to the meadows, at the western end of the meadows. You can see in amongst the trees there, these mason's pillars, and you might have wondered what those were. Well, they were put in around the time that Geddes was talking in Heriot-Watt lectures in the 1880s, 1890s, and they were put into the meadows, and they were made up of all the different building stones there. So you can see this, the annotation, which I think comes from something in the 1940s, where people have made a note about which rocks are weathering and which have not. The rock that's immediately under the line figure at the top is from the Hales Quarry, which is close to us here in Riccarton. So we have some fairly good stone around us, but some of those stones have weathered, and they'd weathered more. And if you go and see that, you can see the names of each of the quarries, you can see those names on the stones, and you can see which of the stones is less weathered and which are the ones that are more weathered. So clearly when you were trying to preserve the old building, you were sensitive to restoring with the right material that would last. We also see this in the sundial, which is in the meadows, which is where there was a site of the Great Exhibition, and there you can see there is some poetry carved onto the stone. You can see the names of the quarries. I think it's Castle, and you can actually see the quarryman's marks as well, although the names are probably lost in the sands of time, as it were. So Edinburgh buildings, of course, Heriot-Watt's original college, in Chambers Street, the Heriot-Watt College site, is built of a Northumberland sandstone in the 1870s. And actually, one stone that I won't talk too much about because it's a Marley flagstone, and it comes from Caithness, comes from Orkney as well. And in that you can see occasionally fish, and that fish sits on the pavement immediately in front of Heriot-Watt College. So the need to understand the geology, clearly Mears had this in his, and Mears was a student now, and he was also became the assistant to Patrick Geddes. So he followed in Patrick Geddes' footsteps as a student of the geology, and was involved in conserving various properties as assistant to Patrick Geddes, and was involved in the conservation and restoration of Huntley House and Bakehouse Close. This building is sometimes known as the Speaking House because there is Latin inscriptions on it, and that Latin inscription essentially says, I'm proud of my house and I want it to be, I hear you, but I don't necessarily listen to you, because people were thinking that this was rather a grand house for Canongate at the time it was built. And so it's now known as the Speaking House, which Jill Hogg advised me of just on a recent tour. So moving on to Basil Spence. Basil Spence was also in the School of Architecture at Heriot-Watt College, and he introduced concrete. So it started to introduce concrete into some of the buildings. In fact, that building, Lock End Close, that you see at the top there, sits in front of Panmure House, and it's a bit of a concrete block from the Royal Mile. So our beloved Panmure House sits behind this building in the Royal Mile. He also, Basil Spence, went on to build, he's attributed the garage there, that some of you will know as a Majestic wine shop. That building was also attributed to Sir Basil Spence. Sir Basil Spence also built Edinburgh University Library at the top, and Heriot-Watt University Library, which is very close to where I'm speaking, at the lower side there. Now, Edinburgh University is quite interesting because the style of those two buildings is very similar, built by the same person. But above, Edinburgh has granite, in fact it's a lavasite, and also Portland limestone. So quite expensive stone, which nowadays looks a bit like concrete at the top, but it's expensive stone, whereas Heriot-Watt went with the brick, a brick that was also chosen to match the trees on the campus, as I was informed by Jill the other day. There are granites, granites used occasionally. These are just a couple of images of granites that you'll find around Edinburgh. One is the column, the Shap granite that Greyfriars Bobby sits on the Shap granite, and the famous geologist in the graveyard up towards the university there is Peterhead granite. So that's Hugh Miller's grainstone is in Peterhead granite. So yeah, granites were brought in to Edinburgh. Edinburgh is not the granite city. Aberdeen is the granite city. Edinburgh is famous for its sandstones. Now, more recent buildings, the extension to the Museum of Scotland, the Map Library, those are both built out of Classack sandstone, which comes from Berghead on the coast to the east of Inverness. The Scottish Parliament was a little bit controversial because they started to import black Zimbabwean granite for the features, the thistle features that you see there. And then Edinburgh Council building, and more recently the St James Quarter, we know as the Golden Turd sometimes, is made out of French Jurassic limestone. So what's quite interesting is that you've started to import stone, foreign stone. I have written a poem which you can see there, and you can read that yourself. But that poem came to me because I was walking around Edinburgh and I found an ammonite, and you can see the ammonite there in the stone. Of course, ammonites are strongly associated with Jurassic and Cretaceous rocks, and there's very few of those in mainland Scotland. So I wondered where this had come from and started to investigate what is this rock. And subsequently I found ammonites on the St James's Quarter as well. There are other rocks that have come. There are Scottish rocks. There are other Scottish rocks as well as the sandstone. You've got the Scottish slate on the roofing tiles. You've got some Devonian paving stones. You've got dolerite from Caldercrook. So that dolerite on that paving stone there is actually just outside the Scottish Parliament at the bottom of the Royal Mile. So it actually tells you what the rock is, which is rather nice. And then there is, near Haymarket, there is some very nice carboniferous limestone with big fossils in it. So there are limestones, sandstones, and granitics material. But then we do also have these English rocks come in. We've got the Portland limestone, we've got the Shap granite, we've got the South African granite, we've got Scandinavian granite, we've got French Jurassic limestone, and we have Spanish slate. And you might think, we have enough rock in Scotland, why do we need to bring in rock from further afield, especially when we consider the sustainability of importing rock and shifting rock around the world. We are to a certain extent the stone around us. You know, we live with these rocks. We may not appreciate where they all come from, but they form our backdrop to our daily lives. So there was a discussion in the council meeting in 2015 that is Scotland running out of rock? And it was felt that the amount of rock they needed for the St James Centre and from the new council building, it was going to take 20 years to supply that amount, although that would probably be contested. And this is what's driven the demand for bringing in stone from overseas. So you can see a later verse of my poem there says, do we really need to bring in stone from abroad? And so I tried to capture that in my poem. So which way are we going to go with building stones in the future? We could go concrete with carbon capture and storage, like that Finnish, or is it Swedish, concrete factory in the top image. We could go with engineered wood. Now, some people think that wood is not very fire resistant, so people are not so keen on that, perhaps. We could reuse the masonry, we tend to do that in Edinburgh. We tend to leave the frontage of the buildings and then build in behind. Or we could use our recycled bricks. So with Gabby Madeiro's recycled bricks, the K-brick technology, and one would be interested to know whether you can make K-bricks in the colour of Heriot-Watt bricks. Because I notice walking around the campus that the more recent buildings do not follow the original colour design of the original bricks. So there are these sustainability issues that we're all increasingly aware of, a need to restore, reuse and recycle, and there's clearly buildings that have been restored, there's stone that's been reused and recycled. In the walls of Edinburgh you often see recycled stone. I think ideally one would transport material short distance, i.e. local, not global, and the stone around us it influences our history, our culture, it's what the tourists want to come and see, it's the reputation of Edinburgh, that lovely yellow sandstone in the evening light, and also it's within our poetics, within our appreciation. So what would Patrick Geddes say today? Well, he probably would say, think local, act global. He would probably say, get our stone more locally than bringing it from the other side of the world. And the three doves that you see on Patrick Geddes' steps there, you see these three doves. Everywhere you see reference to Geddes, you see these three doves, which stand for sympathy, synergy, and synthesis. But it also reflects a move in harmony. Doves move in harmony from paleotechnic to neotechnic. So what Geddes was really saying is that there was technology that was being used at the time which should be left behind and move on to newer technologies, and it's probably as true today as it was then. He also is a quote that it is interesting sometimes to stop and think and wonder what place you are currently at used to be like in times past, who walked there, who worked there, and what the walls have seen. So on that note, I would end up with these cobblestones here, and as Patrick Geddes said, by these we breathe, I would say, like the cobbles we tread, show us that pathway, one that no one has trodden before. So I leave you with that thought. Thank you.